in July. I think it was around the 19th of July. My memory doesn't serve me that well at the time. But Phu Loi Army Airfield, which was in the Third Corps area, South Vietnam, about 28 miles from Saigon, was hit by a savage rocket attack. At the time, it was reported in the after-action reports and in the Chicago newspaper that somebody got from home. There was a front-page story in the Chicago newspaper about our base being hit, but there was 250 rockets, and that may not sound like a lot, but we're talking major explosions here, and they were coming into a small little area airfield. And anyway, the night that happened was the night before me going to my scheduled R&R. I had been there about a year, about a half a year, and it was my time to go on R&R, and I was looking forward to getting out of there. And I had planned to meet my mother, which I sent her money, and she flew from California, and she was going to meet me at the Tokyo Hilton Hotel in Japan. So I needed to be there, and I couldn't stand her up. I mean, I didn't have a telephone call to say, geez, I'm delayed. We're under attack. I can't get out of here. And I didn't want her to worry that something wasn't happening. And besides, she was going to be running up a hotel bill that I had the money to pay for. So for a lot of reasons, I was looking forward to get out of there that night. I'm laying there in bed, and a bunkmate above me, a guy named Steve Brooks, he's laying there, and we're both listening to the sounds. There was a sound outside that was going thump, thump, thump. It's getting louder and closer. And we had artillery going off really loud almost every night. We never paid attention to that, but this was different. It was incoming. We both looked at each other. We knew it was incoming. And so he jumped up, I jumped up, and we woke everybody up. We got everybody out in the bunkers. And I went back inside to make sure we had everybody out. I'm standing there by my bunk, and there's only one other guy there, and he's a new guy, and he's getting himself dressed or something. I don't know what was taking him so long. And I'm yelling at him to get out, and all of a sudden there's an explosion behind me. One of these big rockets had actually hit just a few feet from the wall of our hooch, and it lifted me up. The force, the concussion, and the power of this explosion actually lifted me up and into the air, almost hit the ceiling, and landed about 15, 18 feet, something like that, just a good distance away from where I was standing. And I landed on my forehead. It bent my neck, bent my shoulder, bent my back, and I passed out. I was totally in darkness. Don't know for how long. My guess is less than 30 seconds. But when I came to, I noticed that the guy I'd been yelling at earlier, he was laying in a pool of blood. And when I turned him over and he looked at me, he was kind of concerned. And I looked and it was just a big piece of metal in his neck from the explosion. So it wasn't that serious. So I told him he was okay. Boom. Told him to get up, get into the bunker. We had bunkers on each end by the door. There was one door on one side, one door at the other end. So we had two ways in and out, and there was a bunker made with sandbags and a metal roof and sandbags on each end. And so all the guys were inside there. Unfortunately, it had been raining for a couple of days, and inside these bunkers, because there was no drainage, it was like 18 inches or 2 feet of water and mud. So when they got into there, and most of the guys just had their underwear on or a pair of pants or something, and they're sitting there in the mud, the cold, wet darkness with these explosions going off all around them, and there's sand drifting down into the thing. Every time an explosion goes off, the sand from the sandbags coming down on them, and it's choking. And a guy next to me, who was a young guy, he was only about 18 and a half. Yeah, I was the old guy, I was 21. So he grabs onto me and he's shaking, and I didn't think he was shaking because of the cold water. He was scared. I looked at his eyes and they were big, and his face was all wet, and yeah, maybe it was a splashing of the water inside there, but again, I think he was crying. He was fearful. And he grabbed onto me. He says, they're going to kill us. They're going to kill us. They're going to kill us. I said, don't worry about it. We're okay. We're okay. And then I hear this guy running by the bunker going, there's a VC in the wire. In other words, the perimeters have been breached at a couple of spots, and there was actually enemy troops inside the compound running around the airfield. That was the rumor. And so these guys were, shouting out and telling people, warning people. Well, we didn't have any weapons we could grab because our rack had been destroyed, and we had 20 guns sitting in that rack. When the explosion went off, the force of that explosion that lifted me took all the rifles that were sitting in the rifle rack. We're talking M16s with the barrels up and locked. It bent them all to a 90-degree angle. So every rifle, the barrels were bent 90 degrees. Now that rifle rack was in front of me about 10 feet. Explosion was behind me. So the force was powerful enough to lift me up and bend all that metal sitting in the rack. So had I been up against a wall or unable to be moved, then the full force of that energy would have really did some damage to me. But the energy lifted me instead of banging me really hard. So we didn't have any weapons. So at that point, I got out of the bunker. I'm just in my underwear and had my dog tags and I had boots on. So I go running over to the first sergeant's hooch where he's at to report in to let him know that I just did a head count. Everybody's accountable. But our building, the hooch is damaged. And there's big holes in the roof and the wall. And but I told him I was going to go down the flight line, check out the helicopters, get a couple machine guns and see if we could save a couple aircraft, get them airborne. So I went back, got my pants, got a shirt, grabbed my gunner. We ran down the flight line where all the action was at. We're talking helicopters on fire. We're talking explosions. Talking about jet fuel burning. Not a good safe spot. We did probably the world's quickest pre-flight whoever could find. We saw a couple of pilots running, looking for some aircraft to fly as well. We called them over. Bob Codney, I think he was a warrant officer at the time before he became an officer. And the other guy was Ed Ewing. And they jumped in the aircraft. I told them, hey, look, I've just checked it over. There's no holes. It's the best I can guarantee you. There's no holes. That's all I know because it was dark and I didn't have a flashlight with me. So we got in. We didn't turn any lights on other than the navigational lights and the instrument panel. We started up and we did one of the quickest startups. And we kind of hovered over to the runway, and we had no trouble seeing the runway because there was so many fires going on that the place was really lit up. So we were lit up too. So we knew that people were going to start shooting at us as we went down the runway. So we got transitional lift going as fast as we could. We lifted up and headed towards the only area in the sky where we didn't see any gunfire tracers going or rockets and stuff. We were concerned with the height that these rockets were coming in at, their trajectory, so we didn't want to get hit by one of those incoming. So we got up a good distance up, straight up above the base, and we looked down and we could see gunfire rounds going all over the place. And then we heard on our radios that Air Force was sending in Puff, the Magic Dragon. It's a big gunship. It's converted another type of aircraft, and they put all these miniguns in there. And anyway, it's a weapon, a major weapon. And so it flew in there, and so we got up in the sky. We didn't have our running lights on. We didn't get shot at. But we also wanted we wanted Puff to know where we were at. So, but we got up above it, and this thing turned over and started opening up gunfire on the entire perimeter, making a big circle, and just blah, 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 blah. Thousands and thousands of rounds coming out. And all of a sudden, the sound of the mortars stopped. And less gunfire. It got quiet. So we circled around. The pilots called in and see if anybody needed any medical evacuations. We took care of that problem. And we stayed up in the air as long as we could in case we were needed. And to watch for if anything else happened with the perimeter and if anybody needed a gunship up there. We weren't a gunship. We were slick, but we had 2 machine guns. So we finally got down. We landed, and it's it's getting to be sunrise, and I could see all the damage all around me. It was major, and there were still fires on the runway, and we had a fire department down there, trying to extinguish fires, and there was still smoke. And I looked at my locker. My locker had holes in it. My uniforms I was going to wear on my R&R on my leave had little burn holes from shrapnel. My hat had shrapnel holes in it. And my record player with the speakers that I had there to listen to good music had a hole in the speakers, and it was damaged. But I had no holes in me other than the fact that my head had a big, huge goose egg and a cut, and it was bleeding. And I didn't dare want to report to anybody that had been knocked out or that I had a concussion or that I had been bleeding, because at that time I had about 20 minutes or so, and I was going to be getting on a flight to go on R&R. It was going to fly me to Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base in Saigon, and I was going to get on a flight to Tokyo. So I did not do nothing to jeopardize my R&R. So I took my hat and I pulled it down over the bleeding head wound and the bump. And then I said goodbye to my friends and kind of wondered what was going to happen to them. And I got on the runway. There was a helicopter that was flying into Saigon because I was concerned about that. I got on it. We circled around the base one time. I flew over our hooch, and waved to all our buddies and the guys that were down below, and then they dropped me off in Saigon, and I went to R&R. It was important that I get to R&R because I had an airline ticket, and I flew my mother there from San Francisco, and she was waiting at the Hilton, and I had no way to contact her, and no phone, no email, none of that stuff. And besides, she was going to be counting on me to pick up the hotel bill when she got there. So me reporting for an injury was not an option. So I left. As I got on the airplane, I was thinking about my buddies I left behind and if that was going to be the end of the attack or what was going to happen the next day. And I went to R&R, and for 6 days I threw up and had a headache, and I was sick and feeling really miserable. But I was on R&R, and I was not at the base camp. So that's what happened in July 1967. For those people that followed me there, you had another pretty big attack in Tet during the Tet Offensive. But this was probably the biggest attack that the Phu Loi Airfield had up till that time, and maybe perhaps the whole time there.